Good morning. All right, Jonah. How many of you saw what we were studying and you were like, I don't know, Jonah? Isn't that like a kid's story? I don't even know if I believe it. I don't know how to talk about it with my friends. Whenever I'm like talking to a non-Christian, they're like, yeah, but Jonah? And you're like, yeah, I know. Jonah. What are your preconceived, not misconceptions, old conceptions, whatever it is about Jonah? What comes to your mind when you say Jonah? Swallowed by a whale, okay, or a giant fish, or whatever we like to say. What else? That he was disobedient, okay. Say it again. It's a very short book, correct? And what? Ooh, ungrateful. Okay, good. Yeah. Running from the Lord. Didn't follow God's plan. Negative. How? Yeah, like you read some books and you're like, in the ending, you're like, oh, yay. And at the end of Jonah, you're like, wait, what? If you haven't read Jonah, here's my challenge to you. Whether you're doing the homework, not doing the homework, Jonah's 4 chapters, 1 book, short chapters. Let's try and read through the book of Jonah 1 time a week for as many weeks as you're able to do that. If that means you have to skip some other I want us to be so familiar with the words in there that we can speak to it without, for me, if I'm honest with you, Jonah, I instantly get like cartoon vibes. Yeah, maybe VeggieTales like flannel graph, like it's like, dee, and then, and you're like, I don't even know how to do that in real life. A lot of the women that we studied last time, like we talked about real life, and you're like, yeah, I can picture her. I cannot. I try so hard, and Jonah's a cartoon. But he's not. And so what I want us to do is I want us to make a commitment to launch into this study with some agreed upon ways of viewing the story. And I'm going to explain what those are in just a minute. But a couple years ago, I, for some reason, got stuck in the book of Jonah. And I did some extra reading of the story, and there's a particular spot in there that when God's talking to him near the end that God was using to say something to me at that point. We'll get there later in the semester. But I remember thinking, God, what can I learn from Jonah? This is Jonah's book. It's his story. What am I learning? Because that's how I read the Bible, right? We look at Esther and we're like, okay, what was her life like? What happened? What do we learn from her? How did she do it? Great, I'm going to apply Esther truth, right? Or Mary truth, or whatever truth, right? Jonah truth. And as I kind of jumped into the homework and stuff from Priscilla's book that we're going to go through, she makes a very clear point from the get-go that I was like, ooh, yeah, thank you. And what she says is, this is not a book about Jonah. Jonah's not the main character of the book named after him. God is. God's the main character of this book. And a lot of times in the prophets, we see that what we're learning about is God's heart. Because prophets, their job was to hear the word of the Lord and distribute the word of the Lord to the people. So really, they're just a vessel, a channel. And what we're supposed to be learning about is God. And so this reminder to me made me think, have I missed that? I've read Jonah a lot of times, more times than maybe is necessary, but all of a sudden, like a month ago, I started reading it looking different, and I received it different. When we focus and zoom in on something, we'll see it real well. But the question is, what might we not be seeing if we're zoomed in on the wrong target? What we focus on matters. And a lot of times when I'm putting myself, because really why I'm putting Jonah there is because I am trying to relate to Jonah and I need to know how this applies to me. So I'm still at the center, right? When I'm at the center, it's a very narrow view. And I'm seeing stuff, but what stuff am I not seeing? Because a me lens puts everything through my understanding. I mean, we call it my life. I mean, it is. But if I see everything from my view with Jonah or myself at the center, then it's about my feelings, my understanding, my gain or loss, my. How do we go from a me, my lens to a yours lens? Or even a we, ours lens would be a step in the right direction, right? I remember studying the Lord's Prayer, and as I studied it, realizing this, when Jesus taught the disciples to pray, it was not, here's how you pray personally. This was a corporate prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation. It's not personal. Isaiah, he's talking to the people at one point, and Isaiah 58 is a chapter I got stuck in for almost 2 years, where God was teaching me what pleases him is when what I do in obedience to him is not for me. It's on behalf of his people, his children. So when we start Jonah, I want us to agree that we're going to put God at the center. God is the main character. How are we going to zoom in on God? So as we're reading this semester, if you get stuck because you're like, I don't get it, then ask yourself, okay, what's God doing? What is he saying? How is he interacting? What's the message? Yes, Jonah demonstrates a certain kind of response to God that we can learn from. But can we peel back that lens and just shift a little bit and make sure that God's in the center? Can we do that? So Priscilla's book, Navigating the Interrupted Life. We're going to be talking about how our life gets interrupted. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, okay, I know a little bit about that. I feel like my life's always interrupted. Let's just make sure that we're clear on what interrupted means. So I did a little definition search. I like to know what the words really mean and not just what I think they mean. This is what the dictionary said. To interrupt is to stop or hinder by breaking in. To break the uniformity or continuity of something. I thought, oh, breaking in. Yeah, that's like when someone cuts me in line. Or cuts me off when I'm driving. Or takes my spot when I've been waiting patiently and you think you can just pull in. Or anybody doing child pickup right now and this is your truth? Our school is in the middle of being newly constructed. The parking lot's tiny. There's a million kids all being released from one exit now instead of where it used to be two. And I'm telling, more than once a day, I'm saying, that is not the lane for that. No, you cannot come in. I waited my turn, and you tried to cut. I'm saying, and I'm having to say, stop it. Why? Being interrupted requires, I think, us to feel like we own something or deserve something or have something going, and you're trying to bust it up. Okay? We don't feel interrupted when we're just like cruising through and someone's like, hey, let's do this instead. And you're like, that sounds great. I didn't have any other plans. Let's do that. We don't feel interrupted if we don't already have a plan. But when we have a plan and we hold the plan and the plan's interrupted, we're frustrated or we kick back. I remember so I have 4 children, and they grew, and then they went differently all at different times. Somewhere right here, cancer, treatment, done, remission, last child off. Now I'm like, okay, oh, God, you shook it all up, interrupted my life. All right, let's do this. And I came up with a really good plan. And then he said, catch this. I literally have a picture. I remember blogging about it, of me holding my grandson at 1.5 years in the air, trying to get him to stop crying. It's actually a scream. I've lost hearing. I just had my ears checked again, and it's not better. Holding him, and this picture in my head of, this is not what we talked about. This interruption is not what was on the books. And I was more than resistant, you guys. I was kind of a griper. And I didn't want to do it. And literally God said, catch, like it was catch or die. So I caught. It's been the best intervention of my life. But if you'd have asked me then, I would have said, how dare you? I would like to travel with Paul and save the world. And God's like, how about you stay home and save one? I was like, travel the world, save the world. That's kind of, I couldn't see it. Here's when we get interrupted, and this is what Priscilla tells us. When we see an insignificant person, and we're being asked to do an insignificant task, it's going to feel like an interruption. Ugh, I even hate saying that, because if I'm talking about my sweet grandson, Monroe, he's not insignificant. But in that moment, my lens didn't have room for him to feel like he could be at the center. When it's my plans, my dreams, even my needs, like it feels fairly regular to think that after you've raised your kids, you'd get to do something different. My plans, my dreams, my vision cut in on feels like an interruption. But what if we could see the interruption as an invitation? And if God is directing us in a way, or breaking in or cutting out something, could we see a significant person? Because all of God's children are significant, yeah? Not just the ones I love, not just the ones I have time for, all. A significant person, if I can see it that way and then see that the task is significant, I'm going to see it as a divine, I'm calling it an invitation. Because we all get to choose how we're going to reply. If we look at Jonah, it says that his interruption started in Jonah 1:1 when the word of the Lord came to him. And I see that, but here's the thing. The word of the Lord had already come to him. He was a prophet. He'd been living in Israel. He's doing the receiving the word and giving the word. We know this because in 2 Kings, I'm going to go there really quick. 2 Kings 14. The context is, so the kings are not fun to read. It's just not. So the nation of Israel is divided. Now there's 2 kings. If you're a parent and you have kids that can't get along, this is what it is. I'm sure God's like, seriously, you're all chosen. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they fight. The thing they have in common is that their hearts are not after the Lord. Now, Israel kind of gets the first reputation for that. They like lead the way into wickedness. And there's king after king after king where it's like, he reigned for this many years, and he was wicked before the Lord. But he's the leader of God's people. And Jonah's a prophet at the time. And Jonah's receiving a word. And this word is given in 2 Kings 14. It's Jeroboam. He's evil in the eyes of the Lord, but he's able to recover some territories that had been lost by some enemies. And it says in verse 25, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had promised through Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-hepher. Why? 26, for the Lord saw the bitter suffering of everyone in Israel, and that there was no one in Israel, slave or free, to help them. And because the Lord had not said he would blot out the name of Israel completely, he used Jeroboam, the son of Jehoash, to save them. So Jonah's been speaking the word. Now, lots of prophets speak words like, you're going down if you don't repent. We don't know. There may have been other messages during that time, but this is the one place we know where God spoke a positive message. You will regain these lands, and it came true. So when I see the word of the Lord came to Jonah, I'm thinking, this is normal. This is regular and expected. Here's the problem. I think the word is different this time. Before, it didn't seem like an interruption. All of a sudden, it feels like an interruption. Why? I think because what God's about to tell him to do requires him to give something up. He's going to have to shift and leave his homeland and go somewhere else. And it's not just somewhere else, it's an enemy territory, a violent enemy who is working to destroy his nation. And yet he's supposed to go and give them a warning that God is asking them to turn from their ways. I think this was a crisis of faith for him. Like, I don't get it. I feel like what it was asking Jonah to do was to sacrifice on behalf of someone he would have considered very insignificant. Right? To actually work on the behalf of an enemy, of someone I don't like and doesn't like me. Like, that's just, how would God ask for that? This is why it's important for us to remember God's the main character. Because if I look at Jonah, I can be like, oh, dude, yeah, I get that. That'd be really hard. If I look at it from God's perspective, now I'm in the crisis of faith. Why would you do that? Your own nation, that's like where you're supposed to be protecting. Why would you protect the enemy? God, his ways are above our ways. Always. We have to look at what God's doing to understand who God is. Because he's doing something here that's different than what he's been doing. And he's going to teach us some things by doing that. And Jonah gets to decide. What's he going to do? The interrupted life, Priscilla says, is a privileged life. It's an invitation to partner with God to do something we couldn't do on our own. And next week, we're going to spend a little bit of time from the homework. There's some other people in the Bible where the word of the Lord came to them to ask them to do things that were interrupting their current situation. We get to see how did they respond, because everybody gets a choice. How are we going to respond to God's word to us? We get to decide whether we'll yield, even if it costs us some of our own plans and paths. She has this quote on page 21. She says, "We don't mind following Christ as long as his path eventually converges onto the one we've already chosen." Right? But just like Jonah, I'm not the main character of my story. I mean, my life's a lot about me, but it's not ultimately about me. And I don't know how that feels when I say that to you. I know when I say it to myself, it doesn't feel great. Because I'm kind of like, yeah, but, right? I think it's day 4. She does a little thing on ownership versus management. And this ownership versus stewardship, like it's stuff we've heard before, but I think when we think about our life, sometimes we think about our finances and our skills and talents and our children, and it's all like out there. And you're like, yeah, you can have all of that. And then when God's like, yeah, but your life is mine too. Ugh. But you gave it to me. Don't I get any say in this? And I do. Here's how I see it. You work in a job for the owner of the company. You're the manager. The owner sets visions, goals, mission. As a manager, your job is to implement, accomplish the vision, goals, mission, yeah? The minute you're like, I think I actually would rather do da-da, you're going to butt heads with the boss. And at some point, the boss might just say, you got great ideas, but they don't line up with mine, so maybe it's time to look elsewhere. I don't necessarily think that's what God does with us, but do you see where I'm going? In the Old Testament, God called his people stiff-necked all the time. Do you know why? Because they're like what? Oxen. When you have animals that are learning to work the field, they have to learn to rest their necks in the yoke that is guiding them from the instruction given by the person holding the reins. So a stiff-necked oxen is the one that would try to stiffen up and kick it off and go his own way. Messy field, no planting, no harvesting. God's like, hey, guess what? You're also like that. Rest in my leading. All of these things are not things you haven't heard before. Okay, these are all things, I've heard it, you've heard it, we've all heard it. But here's my question. When we say, I'm yours, God, I want to follow you, I want to do your will, I want to be like Jesus, do we actually know what we're committing to? Or do we want, like Priscilla said, to follow Jesus as long as he converges into the path I'm already on? Because if he's going to ask me to get off, I just don't think that's a good idea. I don't think he's thought about this. I don't think he's thought about that. Let me lay out the problems ahead. Remember, the interrupted life is the privileged life, because no matter if it costs us something big, if it's harder, if life gets more difficult, it will be better. Why? Because if the main character of the story is me, and I end up, in the end, successful, blessed, then I might think that it's better. But remember, it's not my story. So if God's the main character, and his plans and his visions and those things being accomplished is what's better, and I'm off over here, not a part of it, is it actually better or worse? What we focus on matters. It might feel simple, it might sound innocent, but it profoundly changes what we're willing to shift for. Because if my best is at the end game, I'm going to stay focused here. If God says your best is this, because it's my best, it's her best, it's his best, and I shift, now I'm resting, receiving the word of the Lord in a way that honors him. Jonah makes a statement in the middle of the book. He's praying. Jonah 2:9, he says, I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows, for my salvation comes from the Lord alone. Jonah 2:9. I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise. Oh, I read that and I was like, when I offer sacrifices, when I'm obedient and it costs me, are my songs full of praise? I mean, is there any singing at all, actually? Does it sound more like wah, wah, wah? Like all my friends and family might know, oh, she's so amazing. She's like obeying even though it's really hard. But what they hear from me is, and it sucks. It's so hard. I can't believe God would ask me to do this. Why would he? You know what I'm saying? And then you're like, but I'm obeying. Okay. If you've never obeyed, jump on that wagon, that's fine, stay there. But if you've been walking with the Lord for a while and we're still singing songs of lament when we say yes to Jesus, it's time to board a new train, ladies. Songs of praise and thanksgiving. Thank you for the invitation to shift. That doesn't mean we're like, yay, it's my most favorite. But we're like, God, you're good. I don't get it, but this is going to be, you've got something. I don't know what it is. Don't be fake. Everyone sees through it. I've got to be honest, but can I be honest in the fact that obedience as a grumpy lady isn't actually a sacrifice of praise? Nobody's looking at me going, ooh, I wish I could be a Christian. Sacrifices of praise. Because when I said I'll follow you, Jesus, I committed to that. And if I commit to it, some of us are like, oh, if I said I'd do it, I'm doing it. Oh, except when it comes to sacrifice for Jesus, because that's really hard. Oh, let's be as good in fulfilling our commitments to God as we are in fulfilling our commitments to our friends, our families, our jobs, our gym. We can do this. I know we can. In my reading last week, as we get ready to wrap, I was in Jeremiah. And Jeremiah 10, he's in the middle of giving all this, like, you're evil and you've disobeyed God and now the enemy's coming and all the things, idolatry's bad and, oh Lord, why? And he's like, they're bad and all the things back and forth. And this is what Jeremiah prays. 10:23, I know, Lord, that our lives are not our own. We are not able to plan our own course. So correct me, Lord, but please be gentle. Do not correct me in anger, for I would die. I read this and I was like, yeah, there's a piece of homework where Priscilla asked us to do a declaration of dependence. And part of it is, this interruption piece when God's redirecting or doing something different. We resist so much. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we want to be in control. We want to be independent. All the ends in something. And he's like, just drop your shoulders and rest and watch how we plow this field together. It's going to be amazing. Not easy, amazing. God says, I have formed you. I've recorded every day of your life in my book. I know the number of hairs on your head. You are my masterpiece. I've chosen you. I will bring you back. Remember our agreement. God is the main character. The story's about him. We're going to zoom in on him. I remember, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, break was coming up, like fall break, spring break. I honestly can't remember which one. And we all know that means if you have kids, it's not a break. And so, like I'm on a mission. I've got things I got to get done. Work's crazy busy. We're trying to build a building, still trying to build a building. And I remember that I challenged myself to set a timer on my phone to like multiple times a day to remind me to breathe and pray. Because, this is what they do in the convents. Seems like it works. Should be good for me. So I'm doing this thing. And all of a sudden, I realize, this practice, the reason that it gets done in the convent or the monasteries or wherever is because, I looked it up. I'm like, why? Why do we do that? Because the bell reminds you that when it goes off, whatever you're doing is dropped, and you stop, and you put your focus where it should be. We're willing to stop everything in that moment to focus back. I'm like, ooh, that's good. And then they added this little tidbit. It was this priest, Ron Rolheiser, I think's his name. He said, I think that some of the most holy convents are homes. And the most beautiful bell sounding is the little voice that says, and I'm going to translate for myself, Gigi, Gigi, Gigi. And you're like, yep, 5 more minutes, got to get finished on the phone, Gigi, Gigi. When I started to recognize that Gigi was like the bell chiming on my phone, significant person, significant task, divine intervention. Drop everything. Who is ringing your bell right now? Or what? What is it that when that bell goes off, you're like, ugh? Can we switch? My life is not my own. I cannot make my own plans. Correct me, Lord. But please be gentle. That's the honest truth, right? Please be gentle. Big interruption, little interruption. Sometimes it doesn't even matter. We respond the same. So let's practice small. And we'll be ready in case God's word to you says, go to Nineveh. You have an opportunity to work through some questions at your table. There's a lot. I didn't look. Rachel, did you put them all in there? Great. touch what you can today, read through them. If one of them says, this is the one, then spend the time on it. If it's like, oh, no, not today, we'll get to it next week. Spend some time being honest about your response to interruptions, and maybe the gut feeling you have about God saying, it's not yours, it's mine. And let's be women, open and ready to keep our eyes on God this week. Let me pray. God, thank you for our time together. Thank you that you do not stop teaching us. We do not ever reach a time where we say, got it. There's more. There's always more. So, Lord, help us know what the thing is that you're trying to do to and with for us in this next semester. Help it to be an invitation, even if it's correction. Oh, be gentle with us, but lead us, guide us, teach us, grow us for your glory and your purposes. Amen.